Thank you very much, everybody, for attending, and a very Merry Christmas to you. This is your weekly notice that it's still Christmas. Some of you will get that joke more than others, I think. I want to say that I wasn't always a fan of Ayaan. As you know, at one time she used to ride with the New Atheist movement and was considered at an intellectual level an intractable foe to the Christian faith. And through her own journey, which is well documented in other places, other podcasts and other interviews, you can learn of her own spiritual journey into the Christian faith. But regardless of whether she was an atheist or a Christian, she's always been a voice of reason and wit and intelligence in an otherwise maddening world. And we have come together today to discuss not Ayaan's biography, not further analysis of the issues around Islamization, but to focus squarely upon questions of response. And how do we respond, and how do we think about it? And we're going to cover three areas: politics, organisation and culture. You have pen and paper around you. Please do write down your questions if you have them. At 3 o'clock we're going to go into a Q&A session, but I will not be taking questions from the floor. I'll only be taking your written questions, so please write legibly if you want me to ask your question, and I'll try to get through as many questions as I can. And I just want to say, Ayaan, thank you so much for giving us your time. I know you're incredibly busy, and everyone here is a fan, and everyone here is really, really pleased to be in company, and we hope to learn from you and learn from this conversation. So jumping straight in at the deep end without any sort of warm-up, but going straight in hard, straight in deep into the issues. If, Ayaan, you were granted the ability to click your fingers and have three things done politically to sort of press against or push back against Islamization, against jihadi networks, wherever you want to take this conversation, what would you say are the three, but limited to political policy or political operation, what three things politically do you think are priority in terms of our response to this existential challenge?
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, all of you, for the amazing, kind words and all the fantastic stuff you've said about me. That's very kind and very flattering. I've always been a fan of yours from what I saw of your work. And I love the fact that you combine compassion with clarity. You have a lot of compassion for Muslims and for immigrants, but you also make it very clear who you are and what you stand for. And if I had to click my fingers and, wish for three things and actually get them, I would say it starts first and foremost with the clarity on principles, on the foundations of this nation state and other Western nation states. If we can have politicians articulate that with clarity and with character, that would be my first wish. What flows out of that then is the demographic problem, which I would say once you articulate these principles, you're going to find that we have taken into Western countries large numbers of people who not just dislike our principles or object to them, but who actively want to destroy those principles and the institutions that uphold those principles. And so there, again, I would say, I would take on your attitude of saying everything with compassion and with love for other human beings, even the ones who are your enemies, but draw that red line and say, demographically speaking, we can no longer, it's suicidal to start taking more and more of those people who wish us harm. And then finally, the third one would be action, it would be execution. And to execute, you're going to have to give these demographics the choice to say, if you want to be here, you have to abide by our principles, our laws, our rules, and you just become like one of us. We love you. Every individual here is created in the image of God. If you reject those, then we are going to remove you from the country. I'm seeing this unfold now since the election we had in 2024 in the US, that there is articulation of these principles. We're going to be 250 years, going to celebrate 250 years of nationhood in the United States, and there is a desire to re-emphasize, articulate again, what is this nation about? What is it? Who built it? What is it built upon? What do we want the future of this nation to be? And then we are confronted with, in the United States, this marriage between the far left on the one hand, we call them the Reds, this resurgence of communism, if you will, dedicated to destroying our institutions, hates what we stand for, hate Christ and Christianity, hate the white man, hate Western civilization, hate America. And then we have the Islamists, the Greens. And these two forces, as ideological forces, have joined hands, and we have identified them and said, this is what we are up against. And it's all the different, they used to use terrorism exclusively, but now we are seeing that there is a great deal of subversion and subversive efforts that is to live among us, to participate in elections, to try and win and get power through the system, and then use that power to destroy the system. But on that side, I think what we're seeing is the Trump administration saying, we are going to bring back order where the Reds, the communists, seek chaos. We're going to bring back order, and we're going to keep our citizens safe. That's what it amounts to, which in my view is, first of all, the first task, the principal task of government is to maintain order, domestic order, and protect citizens from foreign threat. And then when it comes to the Islamists, we're going to find them and identify them and break down their infrastructure and remove them from the country.
So in terms of, you mentioned as number one of your three, the idea of principles. I imagine you're talking about first principles, because you mentioned in America the reinvigoration of the American sort of way of life. What specifically do you have in mind in terms as the principles that we need to go back to?
I think it is the principle of nationhood. The nation is a collection of individual citizens, and we have laws, and we are equal before, we're all equal. What I really want to reject explicitly is multiculturalism. This idea that you can have different nations within a nation, and everybody can speak their language, and they can have their own religions and whatever, and diversity is our strength. What we are seeing is this diversity is our strength. It's just not true. Diversity has been our demise. Yeah. There is a dominant culture. There is a reason why I came to the West and why I left where I was born and my parents called home. And it was the dignity of life. It was being, as a woman, treated as a human being and not as a slave. It was the opportunity to look after myself. It was the opportunity to find and choose my own husband. It was the opportunity to have my freedoms protected by a government, and that's what I wanted to protect. That is a product of the nation state. It is I think in the United States of America, in the United Kingdom, but also in other Western nations. There's been an incremental, centuries-long culture that is the outcome of human sacrifice, of the sacrifices of citizens for this country and for Western civilization. I want to see that acknowledged and protected and not thrown away with these fads and these ideologies in disguise saying multiculturalism is the prevailing narrative. It is multiculturalism is grounded in moral relativism. It's grounded in collectivism. You don't look at individuals as citizens, you only look at groups along ethnic lines or along racial lines or along gender lines. And then you create this kind of matrix where, of course, the white Christian man and his history, that's narrative of oppression. We have to decolonize that and destroy all of that. And so that is what multiculturalism is supposed to mean. And I object to it, I reject it, and I think we ought to stop it.
Yeah, I think when we talk about, because you mentioned some things that in my notes I was going to bring up, the idea of, in terms of responses and things that we can do politically. When we talk about integration, and I wholeheartedly agree, I think we have to have a society now where we expect integration. But integration into what? Integration has to be loaded by something. And if we're going to filter immigration, which is, I'm not sure where you stand on filtering immigration.
I think immigration, that's where. So I think when you, first of all, you said, you started by saying politics. So politics is about power.
Yes.
And I think that is why I said you have to express that this is our country and this is what we stand for, and you adopt the responsibility that comes with holding power.
So sorry, go on. Sorry.
And so in terms, and I started with demographics. For me, demographics is obviously, it's immigration, but it's also birth rates. We should be having our own babies, not importing them from elsewhere. But on the immigration side, I think that immigration has to be very, very selective. And it can't be what we have now, which is really this mindless invitation of what some people have called invasion. And if you, and I was in an asylum seeker center, and I've spoken, I used to be a translator, interpreter for a long time. And I remember asking people who are coming from elsewhere when they complained about the host society that they came to, then why are you here? And the answer almost 100% of the time was the welfare state. And so in terms of policy making, you have to look at those things that make this country a magnet for people from elsewhere. And look at yourself in the mirror and be honest and say, can the United Kingdom provide welfare to all the people from developing countries? That is simply not true. You can't maintain that for a long time. And so immigration is selective, meaning you only allow those immigrants that will enhance your national interest.
Yeah.
And I said, let's pull out, this is a policy proposition, let's pull out of the Geneva Convention, that is that international treaty from 1951. It was designed and intended for a completely different era. Let's pull out from the 1967 refugee protocols. That's in the United Kingdom, pull out of the ECHR. All of these international treaties and laws, pull out of those, make your own national laws, and decide who you're going to allow to come here as asylum seekers, and also under what circumstances. Right now, there is no way anyone can vet the people who are coming over on boats, here on boats, and in the United States it was across the southern border. So you have to have a system that actually works and doesn't get overwhelmed.
Yeah, in terms of, because I like now that I'm clear where you stand on the immigration question, we've got to identify by what narrative, by what story do we filter, by what narrative, by what story do we integrate. Now, for me, I would be a very strong advocate that should be a confession of Christianity, that says, you know, if you can get along with our overt Christian nationality, you can come in. If you can work with this, feel welcome. But would you go along with that, or would you want to suggest maybe it's more like an Enlightenment liberal secularism, or do you have a third vision of what should be the basis of integration? What should be the basis of selectivity to immigration beyond economics?
Well, I wouldn't even start with economics. I think it was wrong. I want us to reflect on the way we did immigration, let's say in the last 5 decades, and ask ourselves, what have we learned from that experience? And what we've learned from that experience is putting economics front and center was a huge mistake. number one. Number two, assuming that people with different religions and different cultures will just come and automatically integrate wholesale was a huge mistake. It is true that some people did that. I'm referring, for instance, to people from India, some people from other parts of Asia who have done very well, have done even better than the local people, if you will. But that's a minority. And so for me, a lesson that I draw from the last 50 years is we've done it all wrong. We should have started with principles. I agree with you to the extent that I say I'm not demanding that people be Christian before they enter and settle in this country, but I want to express it as this is a Christian country and here are our principles and you abide by them. And then I would have the transition from being a permanent resident or a visa holder of some sort to citizenship. That perhaps is where I would tie Christianity to, in the sense that to become a citizen of this nation is not merely to obtain a travel document. That it's not instrumental. It is just the way we've been. This is another experience that, again, from the last 50 years, is we treated citizenship as some kind of disposable, cheap, instrumental thing. To become a British citizen was, oh, I've got a passport now, I can travel the world, or some luxury convenience. And so that has to stop, in my view.
It needs to be seen more as a privilege rather than a right.
As a right, yeah. And so maybe I think where you and I differ ever so slightly is I want to point out to the lessons we learned in the life. If we were able to do it all over, go back to the time of Enoch Powell and listen to him carefully and say, instead of smearing him as racist and whatever they were doing at that time, far right and all this nonsense, if we now reflect back and look back and say, did he have a point? And almost everything he predicted turned out to be true. People say, what about the rivers of blood? Well, if things carry on like this, we may end up having those rivers of blood, and that's exactly what we don't want.
Yeah.
So I believe in learning from experience. I believe in reflecting on that time and basically making a list of the things that if, what can we do right now? Confusing immigrants who come here by telling them we're a multicultural nation, not demanding that they learn the English language or Dutch or whatever the local language is, and then providing translations of everything paid for by the taxpayer. I think you reflect on that and you think that was absolutely insane, but we're still doing it.
Yeah. How then do you, because you mentioned about the Islamist Marxist or Islamist alt-left alliance, which is certainly true. You see it everywhere in our politics, particularly with the Labour government today, in the way that it seems
all leftist governments.
Yeah. So how do we break that left Islamist alliance, or is it just sort of fused together ideologically and can't be broken? Is there a way to split off these two groups from one another, or do you feel that it can't be done? And actually, what needs to happen to defeat the Islamists, you must first defeat the alt-left and left-wing politics.
I think that would be playing political games. The way power is wielded is sometimes let's drive a wedge between an alliance like that. But I don't think you will have enough power to do that unless you mobilize the rest of society against these two ideologies. And so what I find heartening, what makes me optimistic now, is civil society, just normal citizens standing up and saying, we've had enough of this. Working class people who, the Labour Party used to be the home of the working class people, and Labour and other leftist parties, they turned their back on the working classes. You look at the Jewish minority in almost every Western country, and you find that they too have become politically homeless and feel threatened. You see, I think this is something we hardly ever talk about, but Christianity has become a minority in its own countries, churches are empty, they're being turned into discos and cafes and sort of modern cultural centers. Churches are attacked in France, in everywhere, but it's never reported on. And the majority of citizens in all of these countries object to they object to the anti-Semitism, they object to bringing in people here who are going to completely undo all the social policies that people worked for from since the 19th century, not having children work, not, various payments that were negotiated over time.
So you don't think it can be broken, it's just got to be defeated. So in that sense,
it has to be defeated. And it is also self-defeating. I mean, it may be broken if you point out to them and challenge them, because their objectives, the roots of communism and the roots of Islamism are very different.
Yeah.
Islamism is rooted in Islam, it's rooted in the Quran and the Sunnah and the Hadith. It has a history and a tradition that is radically different from communism, which is devoted to the killing of God. Right?
Do you not think that there's and I agree. Do you not think that there is a possibility of pitching the different groups against one another? So pitching, for instance, because the left is an alliance of different collections, such as like trade unions, which, the trade unions, the LGBTQ movement, there was in the past a strong connection with the Jewish community, environmentalism. And as you've rightly observed, the roots of Islam and the roots of these other ideologies are radically different. Do you not think that there's a strategic advantage to try and pit these against one another?
I think, to spell it out more clearly, I would say what you're trying to say is, if you look at the minorities that the left claims to speak for, like, yes, gay people, women, at some point Jewish minorities, the blacks when in America, within those minority communities, people are waking up and seeing that these woke people, these Marxists, don't speak for them, they're just using them. I have more gay friends now who are anti-woke, like virulently anti-woke, and who have been termed far-right than anywhere else, because they've found out that these people don't see this gender ideology is not about protecting the individual rights of gay people. It's about using them and their vulnerability to achieve unchecked power to do whatever they want. It's the same thing with women. You would think all feminists would vote left because historically it was leftist parties who claimed that they fought for the rights of women. But then along come the transgender, like really hostile, angry ideology. And it's the left that's prepared. It's your prime minister that couldn't define a woman.
Yeah.
And then you look at what they're doing to the Jewish minorities. And then in America, it's not about black descendants of slaves. It's about pumping the country with people from third world countries who are black, and then giving the whole story of the emancipation of the black people in America and handing it to Somalis, Nigerians, people from Ghana, parts of India.
Yeah.
So it doesn't work. I think you can say you can expose the left. You can also expose the differences between the left and the Islamists. The Islamists want women covered from head to toe and out of sight, okay? They want to throw gay people from tall buildings. So the whole LGBT thing, I don't know how they put that together. But at the moment, the leaders of these two groups have an alliance, and the alliance is, let's work together, first of all, to destroy the institutions of the white man and of Western civilization and of Christianity and of the Enlightenment as well. And then once we're done with that destruction, we'll figure out how things turn out. Now, I know from history, I think you have some Iranian friends just like I do. We know from history when that Marxist Islamist alliance, when it gets to its end point, they just turn on one another, and one destroys the other. And
so, what in terms of civic society and church society, what organizations within civic society, within the church, do we need to cultivate, do we need to build to achieve the ends that we're looking for, which is a de-Islamification, an end to the Islamist networks, a breaking of the alt-left enabling of Islam in our society? What kind of civic and church societies, organizations, orders, groups do you feel that we need?
I think this is what you're talking about is a project of restoration. It is a remoralization of Christians and Christianity. And not just Christians and Christianity, also of those secular, Enlightenment figures and leaders, that it's a remoralization of culture. And that means that you have to look at the subversive efforts of the last 50, 60 years and inform, inspire, and mobilize citizens, especially the youth, reclaim institutions that socialize young people, first of all, into the history that transmits the history and transmits the story of this country.
Yeah.
They have been captured, in some places more than others. You have to recapture those institutions, schools, universities, media. You mentioned unions. There are lots of institutions that are either fully captured or partially captured or have been in some ways weakened and silenced. And so what I would like to see is a great deal of the kind of courage that you have displayed, where you stand and you explicitly call yourself a Christian in a society that for many years declared Christians to be unintelligent, superstitious people. So to believe in Christianity was equated to, believing in voodoo.
Yeah, I think in terms. So, are you advocating a sort of Jordan Peterson style rebuild of Western civilization, or so for instance, to use the example of the trade unions, I think we need a non-socialist trade union network to be built to free people from the socialist trade union network, because people do need trade unions to represent them in the workplace, but it needs to be uncoupled from the ideology.
Yes.
I think we need dedicated missionary groups dedicated to evangelizing Muslims, dedicated to evangelizing people on the political left. And ideally what we need is a state that's willing to back that up.
But we don't have that now. So that is a sort of end point. Right now what we have is the shambolic situation we find ourselves in, where it's in most elite circles in the West, it's still quite an embarrassment to declare oneself Christian. And so I agree with you that what Jordan Peterson has pioneered is fantastic, and we should build on that. But in addition to that, I think we should also look at other countries and see what can we learn from them. I live in the United States, so I find looking at what this administration has done, the insistence on identity. Who are we? What's this country all about? You mentioned the trade unions. One of the things that the Trump administration has done is they said we have to bring manufacturing back. We have to rethink the fact that, for many decades, 5 or 6 decades, the wages of middle-class people didn't move in the list. There's a top cadre of people who made a lot of money, but the bulk of the country, our middle class, what they were making 30 years ago is the same as what they're making today. It didn't move. That has to change. And does that mean a renewed trade union movement, or how do you organize that? And you can still call them trade unions. Before I moved to the center right, I was very much schooled in the story of the Social Democrats in the Netherlands. let me just put it this, it's just the story of the West, where during the industrialization period, there was this confrontation between capital and labor. And the story of labor was all about fighting for the rights of those individuals and protecting them. And that has been perverted now. Labor unions in Western societies have been told to decolonize. They've been told to represent workers from elsewhere, not the workers of the nation states within which they operate, the people who pay their salaries. And so obviously that has to, if you can restore that and clean it up, why not?
I think that there is this need to recapture institutions, and you know, as a Church of England communicant, nowhere is that more true than within the Church of England. But I do think we need different kinds of organisations outside of the social norm. So there's a growing movement of vigilantes who work within the law to entrap and protect children from paedophiles. And they're basically doing the job that the police is not doing.
Exactly.
They work within the law, but they work like they fill up the space of what they can legally do in a very creative and imaginative way.
Yes.
And I think we need a lot more of those kinds of organisations that are working outside of the normal, liberal, polite culture.
Yes.
To do some of the jobs and the issues that just plonk. I'm so sorry. What's going on?
The microphone. A lot of people can't hear you, Ayaan, because your voice is quite gentle. So we're just wondering if you could speak it back.
Okay.
Right. If you grab the microphone, let's just get that to you. Testing. There we go, Ayaan.
I'm sorry about that. Yeah.
Is that better, guys?
Is that better now?
Yeah?
Yeah.
You were all so English and polite. How long have you been sat there struggling? Like, if you'd been a little less English, you'd have had the microphone far earlier.
Yeah.
So in terms of, we need a lot more of those kinds of organisations that are willing to work within the limits of the law, but to work outside of normal, polite middle class expectation.
Yes.
And then change the law where we need to change the law. So we constantly...
Let's stick with the small vigilante groups that work within the law to protect children.
Yeah.
If you think of, when I talk about civil society and civic action, that's exactly what I mean.
Yeah.
What I have seen in many societies, starting in the Netherlands where I live, where people would complain about changes that they did not like. A rise in violence, in theft, in crime, in pedophilia, in all sorts of things that just affected them negatively and made people really, really sad and angry. But then what I also observed is all they would do to try and bring about a change would be to talk to the government that made these horrible outcomes and beg them to change over. And they would go, they would have votes, they would participate, but their circumstances would never change.
Yeah.
So when you say these vigilante groups, this bottom-up civil rights movement, which is what it is, it's the modern day civil rights movement, I think those people then should start applying for, or at least finding their way into the police force, into the teachers' unions, into all of these existing institutions and reclaim them from within. That is, I think, the way to... What the Marxists do is they moved away from this violent overthrow or revolution that they always pleaded for, which was centered around economics. They adopted a new attitude of identity. And then they started taking Gramsci's advice to march slowly and gradually through the institutions. And that's how they transform societies from within. What we need now is the rest of us, those who have lost these institutions, to start marching back through those institutions and restoring them. And that is going to be a long, long process, but it is a long fight. And also because these revolutionaries, these Marxists and Islamists, they don't follow the 2-year, 4-year, 5-year timeline of elections. They are committed to a project in perpetuity. And so the only way really to face off with them is to have the same time commitment.
And Christianity certainly gives us that. The church has that naturally.
Yeah.
But I think that the church has given up on the idea of Christianity as civilization, or much of the leadership of the church is so, and I think this is because of the effects of the Enlightenment, that the church has given up on the idea that Christianity can be the guiding narrative to a civilizational project.
So we challenge those guys, the leaders, and we try and get new leadership in.
I agree.
And what I also say with evangelical Christians, for instance, is, yes, the established churches and their leaders have betrayed the message, the biblical message, and people go around them. And it's not that Christianity has died, it's just that you no longer see it in these established churches. But I think I want to make a case for taking back the establishment institutions. Put up a fight and not just give everything away.
I don't know if you've ever heard of the Protestant Reconquista, but it is a group of Christians who are trying to mobilize themselves to recapture mainstream Methodist, Church of England, Presbyterian, United Reform, to recapture those institutions back to a more solid base. But that brings us to the question of, we see so much cowardice and conflict aversion within the church leadership. Why do you think that is? And what do you think we can do about it? I know you've touched about the idea that we should seek new church leaders.
Yeah.
But what do you think Christians can do in terms of challenging this culture of cowardice that we've got within the church leadership? And why do you think it's there in the first place?
So the reasons I hear that I'm taught is that there's always that ongoing debate within the church between those leaders who say we've got to go along with culture and those who say no, we have to transform culture.
Yeah.
It's kind of in a pathetic place now of limbo. Another argument is I think it's an interpretation of Christianity as a pacifist turn the other cheek approach. And I've seen a lot of people who are actually angered by that and who say, well, in that case, I'm going to become agnostic or leave the faith. So I think if you know scripture better than I do, but we have to find arguments as to why being passive or suicidally empathetic is probably not a valid Christian attitude to have. Another thing is, I think that a lot of these leaders themselves believe in this, they believe in multiculturalism, they believe in the modernized version of Christianity. So I think there are real people who, they really believe that.
Yeah.
And of course, there are always the cynics, people, careerists who are in these positions because you get a beautiful, 500-year-old house and a pension and all the pageantry that goes with these positions. So it's a whole mixed bag of things. But maybe the most important thing is they haven't been faced with any serious challenge.
I do think that a lot of the problems within the mainstream churches is due to the fact that a lot of the leaders live very comfortable lives, very comfortable, well-integrated lives, and they would have a lot to lose by being more controversial, by being more radical, by being more confrontational, and they would lose a lot of their comforts.
Yeah.
And it's for people like me and you, we've embraced a life where we expect and live with the reality that we might be persecuted for what we're doing. Whereas a lot of our church leaders have no theology of martyrdom, no theology of, carrying their cross in a real sense.
They have a theology of comfort.
Yeah, it's a God of humanity and a cult of self that a lot of church leaders follow. Yeah. Do you think that the patriotic movement, the one that is sort of spearheaded by the likes of Tommy Robinson, that seems to be being baptized by the Confessing Church of England, do you see that as having a role? And if you do, how would you speak into the gulf between some of the intelligentsia like yourself, Douglas Murray, and many other names besides, like Jordan Peterson, and the Unite the Kingdom kind of movement that put 1 million men and women onto the streets, over 1 million men and women onto the streets just a few months ago?
Yeah.
There's a big gulf there. I feel sometimes these two are on the same side, but they're not necessarily talking to one another.
Yeah.
And so my question is twofold. Do you think that the Unite the Kingdom movement, the patriotic movement, has a role to play in what we're talking about? And also, what interface should there be between intellectuals like yourself and that street movement?
That street movement is the most important movement. They are the ones who have been displaced and threatened. Globalization has been the biggest threat to the working class white male and his neighborhood. When you talk about these rape gangs and grooming gangs, etc., the way these neighborhoods are being transformed, the people who are affected the most are that group. And the fact that they're standing up now and forming their own organizations, their own political organizations, is something I applaud, because they no longer can rely on existing political organizations. Nobody speaks for them. Therefore, they have to form their own organizations, and they have to walk into the corridors of power on their own terms. That's very healthy.
And the interface between intellectuals like yourself, Douglas Murray, Jordan Peterson, Peter Whittle, and this groundswell.
Yeah, and I think Peter Whittle just passed away.
Yes, God rest his soul.
Yeah, God rest his soul. Again, we're looking back and we're learning so much. There was this prevailing censorship model that if you diverted away from, the narrative of the moment, which was we want open borders and all of these other things, that you were smeared. So Douglas Murray was smeared as far right and still continues to be smeared as far right. I'm smeared all the time. You're smeared all the time. Tommy Robinson, oh my goodness.
Quite an eclectic bunch.
An eclectic bunch, yeah. But Tommy Robinson was not, he was actually really, I think, one of the first Western political prisoners of our time. He's in prison because of what he believes. So I think that we've entered a time now when it's possible to have face-to-face confrontations, have podcasts like this, have the opportunity to have a new media. You don't have to go through the BBC anymore or some of these establishment media. And so I think someone like a Jordan Peterson, and I'm really sad that Jordan is ill, and ARC, the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, have created platforms where we can all convene and come together. I was at the last two ARC meetings, and I met people I would otherwise never have met. I met Christians, I met working class people, the intelligentsia, where there are people from all over Western societies who were all telling the same story and all groping for answers and solutions that are within the law, that are peaceful, and so on. So I think it is possible to have a conversation between what you call the intelligentsia and these patriotic groups. And it's not just the United Kingdom. The same thing is happening in Germany, in Sweden, in the United States. We can have a Western-wide movement.
As someone who comes from the very working class base, that filled those streets. I come from a council estate. I can tell you that for that group of people to be, they are there as a willing troop, but they lack the ideological resource, they lack the existential framework, they lack the investment into terms of their forming of their souls for the fight. And I do believe that it is really important that people like yourself and others find ways to interface with them. And places where I think that interface can happen are places like within Advance, the political party, Advance UK.
I've become an advisor of Advance. Ben Habib has become a dear friend.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the same assessment as you're making.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also the Confessing Church of England. The thing with ARC is that the tickets are just so exclusively expensive, you know. And also culturally, it's not a place where, you know, the people from the kind of community that I come from, they're not going to fit into that. They're not going to enjoy it, and nor will anyone enjoy them not enjoying it either.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
I can say it. I come from a working class background, but in places like within churches, in places like within political parties, or the New Culture Forum, you know, in places like that where intellectuals like you can meet the average Joe and find ways of feeding in to them. There's a willing body of people who want to push back against this, but they need more investment. And I think what I fear, what I see, and sometimes is that you see people like Douglas Murray who's saying all the same things, but won't share a platform or a stage, won't lend their legitimacy. Jordan Peterson lent legitimacy to Tommy Robinson by sharing a platform with him, which opened him up and opened up his arguments to a whole bunch of people that otherwise had filtered Tommy Robinson out through just hearing the BBC narrative or the Guardian narrative or the Times narrative that he's a nasty racist, you know. And I'm just wondering, where do you think the framework, where do you think the crossroads are where the average Patriot Movement member who goes and joins a Tommy Robinson march can meet someone like you, and where you can mutually encourage and learn, where they can feed up to you their on-the-ground experience, and you can feed into them the ideological prisms by which they can engage in the issues?
I think you touched on a very important point, which was, you know, people lending their platforms. And I want to speak a little bit in defense of Douglas Murray, because Douglas himself is traumatized. Douglas's physical life is being threatened. He's pretty much kicked out of the country in some ways. He can come to the UK still, but he's been subjected to a lot of persecution. And I think linking him to Tommy Robinson at some point, again, things are changing now, but linking him to Tommy Robinson would have meant suicide for Douglas Murray. But things are changing, and the point you make is very important, that we have to convene with all these different groups, the working class, the patriotic classes, and where leadership can be offered, it must be offered. I like it that you bring in, you know, the churches, which is, when you walk into a church, you don't delineate people on their class, their income, their attire, that sort of thing. So obviously the most ideal place is the church, and I hope that this type of religious activism comes back. And if there's one thing that the working classes need of the UK and across Europe and the West, it's Christianity. Because that offers them to go back to the principles. But it's a way of life, and it is the way of life that they are seeking to defend. Educating them on that is very, very important. Where do we find one another? Ever since Elon Musk bought Twitter, we've been able to find one another. It's not a perfect platform, but right now it's a great platform. And to be honest with you, that is how I reconnected with Tommy Robinson. I had only heard of Tommy Robinson when I lived in the Netherlands, and that he was fighting these grooming gangs and the jihadis, and then didn't hear much else other than what the media said about him. But on X, you hear directly from him, you hear directly from people, and I think that is, X would be, you and I connected on X.
Yeah.
So use that digital platform as long as we have it. Thank God for Elon, and thank
Amen.
Elon. And as long as he, the world's richest man, stays on our side. And I think he's also, I haven't spoken to him about this, but I think he's also made the calculation that it has to be a bottom-up thing. It is these working classes that have to rise up against this.
Yeah.
And then how do we facilitate actual conventions? That is to raise resources. And I think we can raise resources now so that we find places a bit bigger than this where we can meet. We can use Zoom and other remote ways of speaking to one another. But nothing can replace the actual human-to-human physical contact. One of the things I was reading in British papers is that they're trying to crack down on pubs and pub culture. Pubs is, again, that's where you meet. It's the history and tradition of this country that people would meet in pubs and talk about their problems and conspire to do things about it. So I don't have a ready-made answer other than, again, to look to America. And what I see in America is people have stopped diagnosing and analyzing these problems, and they've started organizing and mobilizing.
And I think that is really where we need to be now as a movement and as people who have this concern, is we've analysed it to death. Every possible commentary and angle has been taken. And I think now we need to move the conversation forward and start focusing on solutions, focusing on initiatives.
Ben Habib started a political party, Advance UK. I think, why not join? Why not, like I said, we need political organizations and institutions that actually speak for and represent the working classes. At this time, they don't exist. Labour doesn't work for them anymore. So maybe in the UK it's Advance UK, or maybe it's Reform. I don't know. But I think we are perfectly positioned now to form new organizations and new institutions.
I think
there's the hunger for that, there's the leadership for that, there's the narratives for that, and there is the fact that we feel an existential threat, that if we do, it's now or never. If we don't do something now, we're going to be overwhelmed a decade from now.
In terms of organizations or areas of response, we've got Advance UK as a political party that is waiting in the wings really to respond to this politically. New Culture Forum is an organisation that's trying to respond culturally. The Confessing Church of England is probably going to end up being the Church of the Patriotic Movement, because it's the group that's doing a lot of evangelism and missionary work amongst the patriots. And there's two elements to this response that I think are needed. Firstly is that we set up, do you know what I mean by base communities? It's connected to liberation theology. It's the idea that communities stop waiting for the state to rescue them, and they start organising themselves to sort out their issues.
Yes.
And I think that base communities of Confessing Church of England congregations could be formed up and down the country as a network through which the sort of religious activism that we're talking about begins to develop. But I think also there needs to be a really strong response to the influence of Qatar
Oh, absolutely.
And the financial influence
Yeah.
that Qatar has over the West, and particularly in the UK, particularly in London. But are there other areas that maybe aren't being discussed enough? Other areas where we've got blind spots, where someone hasn't stepped into the breach to do something that you've been aware of, that come to your mind, where you think, okay, someone needs to start organising in that sphere. Someone seems to start organising in that area. Is there anything that comes to mind?
Well, the first that comes to mind is we're not having babies. And so talking to young men and young women and persuading them to have families. I mean, there are people in their late 30s who still live with their parents, who have no hope of ever getting married and having a family. And if we carry on like this, we are an aging society. All the activism in the world won't help that kind of demographic overwhelm. So that is one area that I think every so often people touch on it, but it doesn't get the kind of attention it deserves. The argument I hear is, it's too costly to have children. I don't know, if you live in Niger and you barely have any water and food, and women are having 10, 11, 12, 13 children. And so I think the argument of poverty it's relative poverty that we're speaking about, and I hope that we can persuade young people to do that. I don't know what we do. We kept talking about our cultural identity rooted in Christianity and the transmission of that identity. And I want to see more organizations that are directed exclusively towards the youth, young people. When I look at Mamdani, who won the mayoralty for New York City, I was shocked by just the sheer number of young people who voted for him. Those are young people whose identity was shaped in universities and in schools by people who taught them to hate their own country and to vote against their own interests. And so in Israel, I think it's called the Aliyah, or
Return to Israel, Aliyah.
The Aliyah, Return to Israel, and that. But they have youth programs that inculcate into young people what it is to be Jewish, what their history is, why they ought to stick together, why they ought to have their nation state, etc. I don't know if we do things like that here. Because all you hear from the mainstream media and the mainstream education centers and everything is that you have to apologize for your history and your past, or at the very least dilute it. But is there anyone doing the opposite of that, anyone countering that? And that, I don't know to what extent organizations like that exist that are directed towards teenagers and young people.
I do think that the church has a lot to learn. The church has a lot to learn about being a people from the Jewish community, and about what it means to be a people with a religious identity. And we could learn a lot about what that looks like from the Jewish community. And I think that nation states in the West have a lot to learn about what it is to deal with the Islamist threat from Israel. And
the Islamist threat is, you can break it up into bite-sized pieces. There is the established Islamist infrastructure here, the mosques that they built, the Islamic centers, the youth camps, the political voter bloc organizations, the influence that they have built here. That has to be countered. Then there is the external support that they get from, as you mentioned, Qatar, the president of Turkey, deep-pocketed Islamists, individuals from some of the wealthy Gulf countries, even though in those Gulf countries the Islamists have now been banned. There is, of course, the internet. We're dealing here with a 1,400-year-old religion that's for the last 100 years has spawned a modern political ideology that understands modernity and uses modernity all the way up to AI to advance their goals. And so there is that. And then, of course, there is the demographic war that the Islamists are waging, and that is they ally with the Marxists. The Marxists say open the borders. The Islamists bring in their choice, and then they herd immigrants as soon as they come here straight into the mosque and radicalize them right here. And of course, the other part of the demographics is by preaching to Muslim women that the way to Islamic dominance is through their wombs, through their uterus. So we're dealing here with a force that is very well organized, very well funded, transnational, and with globalist objectives. They want to dominate the whole world, not just Britain. And what we are looking at, the conversation we are having is, we can see our own countries and our own societies that have been undermined for the last few decades, and we want to start a grassroots, bottom-up movement that covers all of this and that counters all of this.
Thank you. At the chiming of the bell,
yes,
we're going to move into our Q&A session. So you've all had papers and pencils to write down your questions. If you could please pass the questions to the cameraman and he'll hand them all to me. And that will just give us a chance to refill our cups of tea. If we could do this quickly, this is not a break, so please remain seated. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the questions. I'll try and get through the questions as quickly as I can, but if I don't get through your questions, it's nothing personal, but it's better to give a good answer to fewer questions than it is to give poor answers to lots of questions. So I hope you can appreciate where I'm coming from. Going for quality over quantity. And if I can't read your writing, I'm sorry, I'm just going to skip it because we haven't got the time. So we're going to restart. So if we can go back to that tone of quiet attention. Is everything all right with the cameras?
Yeah.
Are we good?
Yeah.
All right then. So, so we already have two-tier policing. How much worse will it get if the government adopts a definition of Islamophobia or anti-Muslim hatred?
It will get more and more censorship. It's going to become suffocating, and I think that it's going to get worse because of these voting blocks. And so the answer to that again would be to mobilize and make sure that your vote counts.
Yeah, and I would just stress that nothing could be worse than if the British government creates a special category of Muslim hatred, because part of the definition is the racialization of the Muslim community, which, of course, from a philosophical level, we would all totally agree with. The Islamic community can't be racialized, but that racialization will be used to silence criticisms of Islam, particularly where those criticisms apply to all Muslim communities, regardless of race. You know, sort of general Muslim criticisms of Muslim community. Thank you very much. So, next question. Given the likelihood of Reform winning an election, do you think that that would be enough?
It would not be enough, but it would be a first step to have an outsider political party come in and literally take Westminster. That would be historic, but it would not be enough. To make Reform do the right thing, we need Advance UK, we need people who vote for Reform and outsiders to push Reform to do the things that they promised to do.
Do you think that in terms of just going back to the Islamophobia law or the anti-Muslim hatred law, what are the things that you think? What's the kind of counter that we should offer to this? Do you think instead we should introduce like a Christophobia law or a Hinduphobia law or an absolute free speech law, or what do you think is the counter to this direction of travel?
I listened to the historian David Starkey say we have to go back, was it 1997 when the Equality Act was passed, and just simply repeal it. And so I hope that when reform comes, that they come with a list of these laws that they want to repeal, and that whole Islamophobia nonsense is not going to make any it's not going to make any sense. I had one of the legal thinkers, a former Supreme Court judge, Lord Sumption, argue for a British human rights law. And I think if you were to adopt that instead of the international one, then the British people can define exactly what free speech means. And I hope that, I'm not a British citizen, but I hope that what you decide is closer to the First Amendment that we have in the United States than what you have here, because the First Amendment protections in the United States, a lot of people think it's extreme, but it has worked beautifully. Yeah.
I think one of the dangers of putting all your hopes in reform is that it could be stopped by strategic voting on the left.
Yes.
When you look at the numbers and you do the calculation, strategic voting on the left would stop a reform government, so it's not a shoo-in. And secondly, I don't know if you're aware of this, but reform looks to be soft on the question of Islamization and unsure about how to deal with it. And I don't know, what would you say to that?
I don't know how to analyze that. Are they soft on it, or are they simply looking at the reality that they will need some of the Muslim vote? Because of just the sheer number of people. I never believe or trust official numbers. So when I ask people how many Muslims live in Britain, no one can give me a straight answer. And the official figures are something like 1.5 million, 2 million. Sometimes some of them will quietly say 4 million. I've learned to at least double or triple those numbers, whatever the official numbers are. It's going to be double that. Now, not every Muslim in the United Kingdom is an Islamist, and some of them are obviously willing to vote for reform because they like the reform agenda of the promise of law and order, and a different economic model of growth, that type of thing. But how do you push reform to do the right thing? Again, that is to mobilize. To
enter reform.
Yeah, to enter reform, to enter politics. Again, it is to have your own organizations where, to get Sadiq Khan for the third term to be the mayor of London, he has to go and talk to the Islamist voter bloc. So we have to create voting blocs that negotiate outcomes strategically, and one of them obviously will be to say no to Islamophobia laws and that type of censorship.
Bring on the Christian voter bloc.
Yes.
So what recourse do you think an individual has to critique Islam and talk into the question of immigration when we have increasing use of hate speech? Policing, the fear is that you would be arrested the moment you put your head above the parapet and you're not able to speak. How do you respond to that
I respond
challenge?
to that by saying stop being afraid, because that's exactly what the Red-Green Alliance wants, is to preemptively scare you into not objecting, not organizing, and you can't object and you can't organize if you don't talk about these problems. If you don't make it very clear what the Islamist agenda is, for fear of being called a racist or an Islamophobe, you will never get to, rally people around fighting for what they have. And so don't be scared, don't be afraid. You're not a racist, you're not an Islamophobe, you're not a bigot. You are saying your interest and my interest collide, and I'm going to fight and organize and raise resources and mobilize to defend my interest. And you can do that too. And we've got to do it peacefully. If they cross the line, which they almost certainly will, the more we talk about it, the use of terrorism and violence always comes from the other side. They then should be held accountable, but we don't cross the line.
I think I would also say to that is that a lot of people from my own community need to learn from people like Ayaan, from people like Douglas Murray, about how you can talk into these issues without falling foul of the law in a way that maybe in our own sort of working class circles we tend to be a bit more blunt, a bit more we're not as precise with our language as we should be and as we need to be. But there are ways to talk into these issues to avoid, because lots of people have done it for quite a while, and so become a student of those people. And also, if it becomes to the point as it is that so many people are talking about it, at some point the political parties, as they have done, take it, well, at least to give it lip service that they're taking it seriously. Like every political party pretends to take this issue seriously.
Yes. Every political party. I used to be a politician. In the morning, they would make us look at the polls. These polls would be sometimes on a weekly basis, sometimes every 2 weeks. And then based on whatever the poll outcome is, we would be asked to change our narratives, our tone.
It's terrible.
It's terrible. I mean, no principles. It's all really very cynical and very fluid. So be very, very careful. That is how the sausage is made.
Yeah.
I've been in there. I know what they do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Nigel Farage definitely embodies that to some degree. Ben Habib, I think, is yet to be tested. So when voting, what should we as Christians look for in a political party, in a political candidate? And should we trust a party that has Muslims as part of its proposed cabinet and MPs?
I don't look at political parties on whether they have Muslims or people of different faiths and the like. I like to look at records. It's a Muslim country, the UAE, that used to be a supporter of the Muslim Brotherhood, hostile to Israel, hostile to the West and modernity. Saudi Arabia too. I listened very carefully. I follow this very, very carefully. And I started talking about change, and I thought, you know what? I'll believe it when I see it. Now there is a record of the UAE actively fighting the Muslim Brotherhood. And that makes me think, okay, we can do business. I trust you on that issue. It's the same with political parties. All of these political parties have records, and you should vote based on that record, based on the record of the individual who's asking you for your vote, and based on the program that they put in front of you. If the Labour Party comes in and says, we're going to stop these boats from coming over, and they're in office for a year and a half, and it has doubled or tripled, then that's a record. The fact that they're making so much out of wanting to make an Islamophobia law, wanting to overturn the Brexit votes, all of these points, all of these things are records. The Conservative Party in this country that governed for a very long time has a record. They have a new leader. She is saying, I'm going to do things differently. There's nothing wrong with testing that as a voter and saying, how? Show me. You're going to work with the very same people, the same programs, with the same institutional rules? What does that entail exactly? Reform. He's never been tested before in office. Well, how is this going to work? How are you going to, you, the voter, you have the power to choose who you want to vote for. And again, to mobilize and form voter blocks as well.
Yeah, I think as Christians, when we're looking at a political party, we need to be asking ourselves, how much does that political party align to the Christian faith? And there are ways of being Muslim, not good Muslims, but there are ways of being Muslim where you can see someone of goodwill who wants to align with the Christian faith. Such a Muslim would be on the liberal side of Islam or on the reforming side of Islam. And so I wouldn't encourage.
There's no liberal side of Islam.
Well, no. My apologies. When I said Islam, there I meant the Muslim community.
Yeah.
They're on the reforming side of the Muslim community. So they're not good Muslims. They're not following Sunnah.
Yeah.
They're not following the Sunnah of the Prophet. But what they are doing is they call themselves Muslims whilst rejecting the Sunnah of Islam.
Yeah. Or ignoring it.
Or ignoring it. And
Yeah.
and I think I would want to discourage people from taking the attitude of saying, well, because you got a Muslim in your party or you got a Muslim in your cabinet, I'm not going to vote for you. I think it's because that's going to a more crass kind of being mobilized by a prejudice rather than by a love for something.
Let me give you an example. If you're a Muslim and you depend on the Islamist vote to get into office, even if you don't follow the Sunnah, even if you're a secular Muslim, you still have to give whatever it is that they demand in return. You can be an atheist. I don't know if Keir Starmer is an atheist, but if he depends on the Islamist votes to get into office, then he has to give them what it is that they're demanding. And so it really doesn't matter what the religious identity is or the person who's asking you for a vote. What matters the most is what has he promised all the other voting blocs, and who are the other voting blocs?
Yeah,
and you even have Christians, by the way, who would go and get that Islamist vote and will be put in a position to.
You can see that in Nigeria.
Yeah.
You know, I definitely think that our current situation requires the formation of Christian voting blocs and the formation.
What is wrong with forming a Christian party?
There is one, Christian People's Alliance. It's just badly led. Maybe you'd like to join them and become their leader. So we've obviously talked about demographics a couple of times. How do we increase the question? I'm going to read the question as written, and then I'm going to give a slight nuance to it. How do we increase European birth rates and reverse demographic change? But I'm going to sort of add into that my own separate caveat, which is how do we increase birth rates in the church?
Mm-hmm. Look at the reasons for the decline in birth rates. So one of the most taboo subjects in the West is to talk about the outcome, the unintended consequences of feminism, where women are told having a family and becoming a wife and a mother is inferior to pursuing your own career. And so that, I think, I say unintended, some people intended it, but I think mostly people did not intend for that to be the outcome. It takes me back to talking about the youth, young people, and teaching them, developing in them in the idea that it is self-preservation to have families. It is to talk up the family. People who are married and who have children, generally speaking, have all of these different indicators. They have better life outcomes than people who are, atomized and living on their own with no children, and so on. And then there's the cost of living, and I think that that's a very, very important issue, but there are ways around it. And as you say, there are all of these bottom-up organizations and movements that are forming. I think it doesn't hurt to start talking about ways of sharing the cost of having families. It's areas where you choose to go and live, the school types that you set up. I've been talking to a lot of people who are homeschooling their children, and there are all sorts of setups, there are all sorts of very creative ways in which you can make modern day Britain and other European countries invest in having children without having to go to the state for help. Because if you go to the state for help, you become, the state becomes the father or the husband, and the state, any time you ask the state for anything, it's in exchange for a little bit of your liberty. And so the more you ask them, the more of your freedoms they take, the more of your money they take, the more of your time they take, the more rules and regulations and stuff that you have to face. So try and do as much as possible without asking help from the state.
I think another aspect to this, and particularly as Christians, this is a question that we really need to face up, is how is it as Christians we're pro-life, pro-family and anti-abortion, and yet in the UK we are the oldest population of all the populations in the UK. What's gone wrong there? And I think that there's two factors. One is we have failed to hand on well and effectively our faith to our children, and we lose huge numbers of our children who stop practicing the faith.
Yeah.
And I think we have a lot to learn from the Amish community, who have massive retention of their youth. But then also, we're not very good at being deliberate about family creation in our congregations.
Yeah.
It's a taboo subject. We don't like to talk about sex. We don't like to talk about relationships in church. And also when people sort of couple up in churches, they have to do it quietly because somehow it's embarrassing to do that. And I think that's a culture within the church that we've got to change. For wider society, though, we also have to just grab the nettle of the question of abortion and contraception in our societies. Yeah. I don't know where you stand on it, Ayaan, and feel free to disagree with me, but I'm in favour of complete abolition of the abortion genocide. I believe it's at the heart of the demographic collapse. And I don't know where you stand on that, but I think that needs to be tackled as part of this question.
In principle, I'm against abortion in principle. I do not believe that abortion is, as they say, it's my right. It's no one's right to
Amen.
Kill your baby. But we live in societies where that is the law. And so I don't know any way of stopping someone who wants to have abortion other than say, please don't. But I wanted to go back to when you said we need to learn from the Amish. No, you need to learn from British history. The British people came to Africa and went all over the world, and they created boarding schools, they created youth centers, they created all sorts of facilities where children were, and this was missionary work. African children were gathered, I don't know, from whatever they were doing as herdsmen or as working on farms. And they were taught and civilized and, taught in English. And then through these school curriculums, they ended up, some of these people who were taught by the British ended up being leaders. You can bring back that concept of the boarding school, because I think that is the best childcare, where the child is in school and the cost of looking after large numbers of children is shared. And that frees up parents to do other things. But that is also, men should go back to teaching. It's a lot of our different parts of our societies have been they've been disfigured, starting with the institution of the family demanding that both parents work. If both parents work, you're not going to have the best outcome for your children.
I do think, though, that part of the reason why we think of children as being expensive is because we also think that life should be filled with so many other things. We think if we don't have cable TV, if we don't have Wi-Fi, if we don't have 2 cars, 3 mobile phones, like we have such a westernized understanding of what is needed to live that it creates the perception that children are expensive. But we go back to the examples in the third world. I went to Colombia. It's not the third world, it's the second world, but there's places in Colombia that are third world. And people there had huge families, and they just didn't have as much other stuff to maintain, but they were perfectly happy.
It's exactly right, and the huge families help each other. Sisters brothers, cousins, nephews, uncles, aunts. They help each other, and I think that's also how it used to be. Yes, we've become individualized. We've centered our lifestyles around materialism, around things, but that also relates to then the farther away we move from actual spirituality, actual practice in the faith and the adoration of God, the more we move towards the adoration of something else. And that then becomes almost always material and hedonistic and selfish, and the act of having children and raising a family is an act of service and duty, and it's a lot of work.
Amen.
And so that is, I think that you're absolutely right. You have to tell that story of, by having a family, you actually rise above yourself.
Yeah, we're offering our lives and souls and bodies up to the God of Mammon, and we're sacrificing ourselves to the God of Mammon, and it's killing us.
Yeah.
Whereas if we offer up our souls and bodies to the worship and service of Yahweh, that will give life.
Yep.
Because following His ways brings about life and gives life. So, final question, and then I'll leave it open to your final comments, and then we'll get you out promptly at the time that I've been given. We talk about the solution to ideological overreach is the idea of people speaking up, but significant portions of the population don't receive any information except through the filtered media, the lamestream media as I call it, but mainstream media is what I mean.
Yeah.
How do we get past the idea of the heavy gatekeeping that's done by the lamestream media? How do we break their monopoly over the minds of the populace?
Well, by treating media as a market, which again, that's what we've done in the United States. You've had names like Joe Rogan and Megyn Kelly and Ben Shapiro and even Barry Weiss. So, these mainstream media, with legacy media institutions, they fail, and people take to the market and they start developing their own content online. Again, I want to go back to say Elon Musk, after he bought X, you can share all that information. That really has smashed that stronghold, that the narrative stronghold that the mainstream media had on these things. I think also experience matters. I know large swaths of very comfortable segments of our population who are not remotely interested in politics or Christianity or morality or anything, because they were just going about their lives and they had a great time. But when these policies start to affect them, when your neighborhood changes, when in the last, the schools in this country, suddenly the new government comes in and raises school fees by saying that they're going to collect a VAT, that impacts people's lives. And it's when that happens, the farmers who were demonstrating here a while back, when people's life circumstances change, that's when they start to think about it. You may not want politics, but politics wants you. Politics wants your money, they want your vote, they want to come and take your neighborhood, they want to indoctrinate your children. And that is when you start thinking about these things. And there's so much of that happening. Government is intruding into so many aspects of people's lives that people are revolting against it, rising up against it. And I think that is also one way of, by capturing that sentiment of people who are suddenly feeling the pinch. Inheritance tax, this tax, that tax. You can't drive into London because you're going to be taxed. It's just a tax. They call it other names. They always give it some kind of, beautiful word, but it's just a tax.
Yeah.
And so it's these experiences that make people stand up, and that is, I think, when you tap into it.
I think I just want to say that I'm greatly encouraged by what you've shared with us. I think you've given us some really wonderful insights. I hope that your voice carries far and wide. I would love to see 2026 be the year where we move the conversation forward from analysis to solutions and then start organizing ourselves accordingly. And I just want to say, everybody watches this, everyone hears this, has a role to play in that. Finally, Ayaan, as we hear the chimes, not at midnight, and parting is such sweet sorrow, as Shakespeare said. Do you want to leave us with any final words, final thoughts, to ponder and to go away with?
2 words. Do not despair. And especially if you're a Christian, remember hope. God helps those who help themselves. So you do what you need to do. Take that action, write that letter, that email, that podcast, whatever it is that you're supposed to do, but do not despair.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.